Hello, V.
Hi, B. Sorry, I don't know why there's two B's.
Because you're signed into my Zoom account.
I don't know why it keeps doing that.
You probably are logged in.
I thought I logged in.
Because you have to log into mine to download the webinar, so that maybe you just saved in your cache or something.
Sure, though, because I'm looking at my account and it's my Violeta PMF, but maybe something, but oh well. How are you? Happy Friday. We've made it.
Happy Friday.
Week.
We made it. As I finished shoveling lunch and I haven't been on back-to-back calls.
I'm drinking some kombucha.
Excellent. And eating cookies. Kombucha and cookies. Breakfast and lunch of champions.
Yes. It's a rainy day in DC, so it's like a cozy kind of cookies, kombucha kind of day.
Can you make sure Polly has the link?
Yes.
Hello, Marisa and Sherry. Forgive me as I shovel the last of lunch before I teach. Oh, I'm sorry, allergies are acting up. It is that time of year here in Florida. All the beautiful flowering trees are making it fairly miserable to breathe. We are likely going to have a small crew today, so we had about half the number of signups we usually do, which is just fine with me. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, Polly. All right, just giving folks a few minutes here. We have a small RSVP list. So I would say I'm maybe expecting 10-ish, which makes me sad because this is an awesome topic and one of my favorites. So I want everybody to love it. All right, we're at 6. I will give people until 12:35 and then I'm digging in. So Violetta, which of the team cookies have you tried?
I tried the chocolate one and the one with the chocolate chip on the chunky chocolate chip, kind of salty. Liked it. It was so good. I'm gonna see which one I try next.
I was gonna say the chocolate vibes are strong on the Progressive Multiplier team today.
Yes. I think that's gonna be all I eat on Friday, just the cookies.
No judgment here, sister.
Rock on.
In my mind, Fridays are meant for carbs and good wine. So
yes, that too. And the wine also fits perfectly with the weather that we're having in DC.
Sorry, it's so gross out.
Yeah.
Oh, guys, if you go ahead, babe.
From DC now, so she can commiserate with my weather.
If everybody wants to introduce themselves in chat, who you are, what organization you're from, anything you want to share. Just we're obviously going to have a really small crew, so this will be super conversational, which I love, because sometimes we have upwards of 30, 40 folks on here. I will go ahead and get us started since we're at 12:35 and I want to respect everybody's time. And introducing yourselves in the chat. Also, I have to report who showed up to the folks at Resilience Initiative so that they can keep track of like what things people are enjoying that they offer and what they aren't and what's popular. Okay, so telling your story for fundraising. Before we dive in, since we have such a small crew, I would love to hear what interests you about this topic so that I can sort of riff on the fly and go through the content. And I will introduce our team who's here and why. But Sherry, can I ask you to what made you come to Fundraising Friday today for this topic?
Sure. I mean, I feel like there's so much around storytelling that I have to learn and that we're not necessarily tapping into. And so I've been just, curious and thought this is good timing. And also, as I said, I am transitioning into a new organization. So I will have a new story to be telling with my fundraising. So I just thought I would absorb what I can.
Absolutely. Awesome. Is it Marissa or Marisa?
It's Marisa.
Marisa.
Can you all hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
sorry, I'm off camera again because I'm all sneezy
Mhm.
and red eyed. Well, just personally, I love stories and storytelling. That's just anytime I get a chance to learn more about how to tell good stories and how to do it compellingly, I love to do that. But on the professional side, because we're the National Immigration Law Center, and NILC is a legal advocacy organization, it's we kind of often have, and we're we do impact litigation, we do national advocacy work, and so we do try to tell stories about how the human impact of the work that we do. As we center the stories of people, immigrants, and all the how policies affect their daily lives. But it's a challenge for us because we don't have individual clients. We're not community based in that way. So that's why I'm always trying to seek out more information.
Awesome. And we will definitely get into exactly some of that of why this is harder for folks on the direct action and advocacy end of the spectrum. Is it Dana? Dina?
Yeah, it's Dana.
Dana, welcome.
Hi. I think for me, when I write grants, I'm very much an academic writer.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that especially like doing advocacy with BIPOC folks, it's not just about changing policy, it's about changing hearts. And,
Yep.
I've been trained in a way where we're supposed to be objective in our writing, but that's not necessarily how the world works.
Got it. And is this your first Fundraising Friday?
Yes.
Okay, your name did not look familiar, so welcome. We typically have a much larger crew than this, but I'm kind of happy we've got a small one for this. So we keep it really casual. Definitely jump in as you'd like. Yasmin, can I ask you what interests you about this topic before we dive into it?
Yeah, sorry, I just realized to turn on my video and then I didn't turn off. No, there we go. Hi, yeah, I think someone else also mentioned this, but I recently started at a new organization. So that's part of it, just wanting to make sure I'm like, I'm gonna have to kind of build my like method of creating a story, from scratch for a new organization, like compared, in a new role.
Yes.
And then also, my organization is quite research focused and advocacy focused, and we don't do direct service. And so I think that makes it a bit more difficult to have a compelling story. We're also, we're primarily grant funded, but we're trying to start like moving into more corporate funding and trying to ramp up our individual giving. And so that's something we're all working on right now, is how to kind of really, really dive deep into storytelling for those audiences.
And Yasmin, what organization are you from?
I'm with Education Trust West.
Okay.
I know you've been helping us as well.
I have. I was like, I have edited all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Okay. So the people I did not call on are members of the Progressive Multiplier team. So we actually have our chief storyteller with us today, Violeta Bermudez. Say hi, V.
Hi, everyone.
And also joining us is our brand new Senior Director of Movement Group Engagement, who is a Fundraising Friday alum, Polly Stamatopoulos.
Hello.
So you never know where Fundraising Friday will lead you is the moral of this story. So, Dana, just to introduce Progressive Multiplier for the folks who we've not chatted with before, we're a funding intermediary and we fund fundraising experiments for progressive movement groups. In this capacity, we are here as a partner of the Resilience Initiative and Leaders Trust. So as I say, please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't. We do record these sessions. There's a link to a private YouTube channel on the Resilience Initiative portal where you can get to all the recordings and the PDFs and all the goodness. So if there's a topic you're interested in, we likely have covered it in our last 2 years of classes. So let me know and we can make sure you get the recording or the PDF. We work with achieving justice groups, restoring the environment groups, realizing democracy groups. So if you are a group in the progressive sector, you are doing that, you're interested in diversifying your revenue portfolio with independent revenue generation work, you are eligible for grants with us when we have funds available. So reach out to me if you're interested in that. My email address is in the appointment. And soon I'll get to say, reach out to Polly, but we're not going to throw her under the bus quite that fast on day 5. So in our capacity here with the Resilience Initiative, we offer 2 things. We do one-on-one fundraising coaching where you can sign up for 5 hours with me or with Polly. Or if you want to do storytelling stuff, you can sign up with Violetta. You know, we've got lots of different skill sets on the team. And we will work on any project you want to with you for 5 hours. So end of year fundraising campaign planning, building your narrative structure, building a development staff plan for the year, whatever is vexing you, we will try to help you with in the field of fundraising. The other thing we do obviously is Fundraising Friday up front in the month. We do a lecture, which is what today is. And then our second session of the month, we do a deep dive discussion on the topic. So there will be like very little deck on that one and much more what's on your mind around storytelling. And we sort of try to peer troubleshoot. And those have been some of the really fruitful conversations. So we have gotten word that the Resilience Initiative is keeping us on board through December. Our contract actually technically runs out next month, so we've been extended through December. So we are booking July through December slots for those one-on-one coaching stuff. So reach out to Michelle Mangle at Michelle at the Resilience Initiative if you are interested. Any questions on that stuff? All right. Since we have been renewed through December, Polly will have to come up with a curriculum for July through December. So with serious assistance from the rest of the team. But where we look first for what you guys want classes on is what do you want? So we always let our students drive the curriculum development. So anybody want to throw out any topics beyond storytelling that are top of mind that might make for good Fundraising Friday fodder? Anybody?
I mean, there's always development planning, which is something,
Just planning?
just, yeah, planning and diversifying and,
Yeah, we've never done classes on like straight up, how do you start a fundraising plan? I've done that in another class that we teach for some Deep South civic engagement groups. But if that's of interest, we can definitely pull that over and expand it. And you know, how do you diversify over time from being, you know, 99% grant funded to having a more diversified portfolio?
yeah.
That's a good idea. So think on it. Email Polly or I with any thoughts about curriculum.
I have a quick question that I'm
Sure.
directed at you or Polly, I'm not sure. But if how do you which organizations can be involved in this? And so if I'm transitioning to a new organization, can I still remain involved, I guess? Or is it based on a relationship with Packard or others?
So the people who are on this call, like, so we don't control the invitation list. It is, so we've got more than Packard on here. We've also got the Leaders Trust, and I
Right.
think there's one other organization. So I would reach out to Michelle because they have put together enough organizations that are providing this to their grantee partners that there may be overlap. And if there's not, ask if, you know, they would allow you to continue as a student. Certainly for us, the more the merrier. It's the same effort for us to teach a class of 7 people and 70 people. So we just want to get the knowledge out. So, but whatever coordination there, I would say Michelle is probably your girl. Okay. And Sherry, just, you know, progressive multiplier, always happy to be a resource. If there's stuff you need, just contact us. Between all of us, we've got a fair amount of templates, resources, decks, 50 odd years of random fundraising knowledge between all of us. So we'll figure it out. Okay, so I've broken today's class down into 3 parts. One is why storytelling matters to fundraising. Communications is definitely not a separate discipline than fundraising. And they are very much one and the same. I want to do a little bit of a deep dive on storytelling and trauma, because I think that that's something, when I think about how I was trained in telling stories for fundraising, I cringe. I cringe a lot of donor is hero, a lot of saviorism, that kind of thing, which is just not behavior that we want to perpetuate. So we're going to talk about how to do that right and not be gross or extractive or disrespectful. And then really get into the nuts and bolts of how do you build a storytelling framework. And we like to work on frameworks because all of the groups on the phone do a ridiculous amount of great work. And a storytelling framework lets you sort of put a rigorous system around what stories to tell when, through what voices, that kind of thing. So it's really a planning tool. And we'll show you ours. So Violetta can do a little color commentary on how she does our storytelling planning. All right, any questions before we dive in? All right, so why storytelling matters to fundraising. And this is sort of plainly obvious, but I like to say it because we kind of forget how hard our jobs are sometimes when you don't have easy to understand brands. So when we're talking about the stories we tell the potential supporters who might give us time, treasure, talents, they want to know, what do you do and what can you and I do for the thing I care about? So when we look at big healthcare organizations, big direct service groups like an American Cancer Society, they can tell you in a heartbeat, they cure cancer and they help people survive, you know? Humane Society, they save animals. Like you see it in their logo, it's the Humane Society. There's lots of brand understanding. One of our grantees is Olay, which is the one of the big organizing groups in New Mexico, and that organizers in the land of enchantment. So what's organizing? Why are we doing it? Am I invited? Who are you helping? What's expected? Right? So there are a lot of questions that people that don't have the benefit of an easy to tell story have to answer. So they have to be a little bit more rigorous with their storytelling. I think somebody had mentioned, we don't do direct service. It's a harder story to tell. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just a different tactic. So this is why it's critical to tell stories to soften the ground. You'll hear me say soften the ground a lot. So storytelling is not one size fits all. There are different tactics and approaches that we use depending on where your organization sits in the spectrum. And if you're talking about that you are trying to raise money from your deep base, your members who are most closely affected by your mission area, or your sort of more mass base of supporters. And that's true of anyone, like raising money from cancer survivors and their families, very different than raising money from their concentric circles of friends and people who care about them, or from people that work in the medical profession. So that sort of holds true for everybody. But I want to go through this, what we call this change spectrum. So the direct service groups are on the left, the direct action groups are on the right, and sort of the spectrum in between. So when we talk about what story, direct service, and behavior change organizations are doing, it's more of a, help, hope, support. It's help a person, give hope to a person, create conditions for somebody to be able to individually change, that is a really succinct story to tell, and you likely have a lot of first person fodder to support that storytelling. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just a little easier. The groups that I have included here are ones that I support along the spectrum. So please know that this is not a judgment that one is better than the other, but that they all have a kind of a between operating within a current power system and helping people that are affected versus actually trying to change the system that is creating a current condition. When we get into that middle ground, and like Ed Trust West sits in this education advocacy space. Milk, I would say, sits in this space, although a little more towards the right. You're talking about that we are educating so other people can change the system. When we're talking about donors' motivation. So Ed Trust West might be, they are, if I donate to them, it's so that they can put out the policy research about why systemic racism in California is injuring students, trajectory to thrive based on the education that they receive. And then the advocacy piece, the changing the system to help a group you align with. So it's really where like a milk falls into that. So, and then you get to the direct action, and these are the groups that have, I think, the biggest storytelling challenge, because a lot of the times you are speaking to people who are not going to remotely benefit from the work, and it is hard to understand work and philosophically align with work. When you talk about somebody like a Southern Poverty Law Center, and you're talking about, at a broad spectrum, systemic anti-racism work, it's easy to get that versus a Detroit Action where they are, they consider the way their AD puts it, they think of themselves as a union for the hood, and they are dealing with, the direct quote from Brandon Snyder, they are dealing with very specific Detroit issues. So it's not a wide donor base. Their deep base is a very affected population dealing with systemic oppression. So it's a harder story to get a funder, a major donor, even a small dollar donor outside of that community to get at the same level you understand. Metro Inclusive Health is making sure that trans-affirming healthcare is available to kids. Go, So very different storytelling conundrums. For those of you that sit on a more difficult place on the spectrum, any comments you want to make about this sort of view, and does this help you think about why this is hard in a little bit different way? And I highly encourage conversation, because there are only 7 of us on the call, and you will get real bored of hearing my voice after about an hour. So
the only thing I can say is, as you're talking through these things, I'm feeling like we fall in all of them, depending.
Yeah, and a lot of groups do.
And so then it's a matter of picking, I guess, which story we're telling.
Exactly. And we'll get into that when we talk about the storytelling framework, because there are lots of groups, like Detroit Action does direct service,
Right.
but they go to market as we are here to change the system and shift power. That is their primary value proposition to a donor. And, the fact that they do direct service is much more down in their kind of narrative structure. But that's a really good point. Okay. So the moral of the story is, regardless of how hard the story is to tell and to align your storytelling to your supporters' motivation, the understanding is key, because people seek out ways to get involved with the things they understand and care about. We can't get away from that. And there is an inherent tension in that we'll talk about in a minute. People get involved with organizations that give them an easy way to shake hands and say hi. And people stay involved with organizations that keep inviting them in and keep showing sustained impact on the things they care about. So this whole storytelling thing is really the opening the door, shaking somebody's hand and welcoming them into the house of your organization. And it really is about making sure what you do and the impact is understood. So let's talk a little bit about how we tell those stories to both members, supporters, and where that intersects with trauma. And that is the case along the entire spectrum, whether you are talking about a group that provides direct service to cancer patients, or you're talking about a city-based, democracy organizing group. So one of the direct action groups that we work with when we were talking about this topic on a call, this was her direct quote, and she said, "Don't ask us to tell you about the trauma so you fund it. We want to heal based on our own resources." And I think that was so powerful. As an executive director of a group that does fundraising, in that what it means to use stories about the trauma, and what the empowerment is about healing based on your own resources. So just keep this in mind. So, well, one storytelling size does not fit all. I will say this a lot. We have to honor that we want to heal and build power based on our own resources desire. So that means that if you are working within a population that has been, affected by systemic oppression, whether you are dealing with a population that has been affected by a disease, anywhere in that spectrum, there is something incredibly powerful about the storytelling and the fundraising opportunity that you provide, the giving opportunity that is about healing and building power, whether that is personal agency power or community power. So when you think about how audience segmentation matches up to storytelling and our fundraising strategy, do not discount your directly affected populations. And when we think about storytelling, think about directly affected populations and the concentric circles out from that directly affected population very differently in your storytelling. If you are a member-focused organizing group, focusing your story on healing and resistance is incredibly powerful. I've put some resources in here. We always try to do these in our decks for those of you who are new to Fundraising Friday. There is a ridiculous amount of great thought leadership out here. Part of what we try to do on Fundraising Friday is collect it. So there's a great article in Journal of Black Psychology about storytelling and resistance and justice as a condition of community healing. So when we're talking about a directly affected population, that is a great resource to look at. Power Shift Network, which is one of our grantee partners in our environmental justice, they did a training for their organizers on telling the story of self and then of the group and of the moment, which even though that is more of an organizer storytelling training, it's great for those of us who are fundraisers thinking about how our directly affected populations tell their own stories. And then the Community Justice Exchange has a great resource of how you help people who you work with as your vendor partners and your B2B partners not perpetuate narratives about the directly affected populations that you are telling stories with and about, so they don't inflict any systemic injustice or harm on that community. So part of our job as fundraisers is to make sure, like, the tech companies we work with and the consultants we work with and anybody else like that, or if we're in a network and we have network members, that they get that being a responsible storyteller is part of their good job too. And that's a great resource for this. Any questions on this before we keep going? All right. V and Polly jump in here at any point. Okay, so while one storytelling tactic does not fit all, there's not one size fits all storytelling, there is one authentic story and it should fit all. So this is a really interesting nuance, and it's one that I've seen change over my career, is that, and even as a student of journalism of the, the old, if it bleeds, it leads kind of approach to what stories we tell. All of that messaging is really rooted in trauma, and in fundraising, really white supremacist rooted storytelling. So saviorism, donor as hero, a lot of othering of quote unquote marginalized or impacted communities. And it casts giving as a way to assuage guilt and a way to empower the donor of I'm doing something. And fundraising results, just to be very, very blunt, perpetuate this storytelling culture. Typically, when you lean into the traditional ways of storytelling and fundraising that create the donor as hero, you will get better fundraising results. I will not sugarcoat that. You get better results because, right, I think it is harder to get somebody to understand, and it takes a longer attention span to really do the storytelling ethically and correctly. It's the easy button is saying like taking the if it bleeds, it leads approach to fundraising storytelling. So you will get better results if you do it. You perpetuate systemic inequality and injustice if you do it. So that is, Polly, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very true that the way, you know, the inclination to sort of to trauma porn or to do it as an offset, you know, the there but for the grace of God go I type of story can be compelling. But I don't think, I mean, I think the reason why we have these conversations is because we can tell different stories and we can do it a different way. And part of fundraising is teaching donors what to respond to, and we can teach donors to respond differently too. And I think that's part of telling the stories differently.
I think one of our ethical obligations to one another as a collaborative of fundraisers, you know, across the spectrum is retraining how we have trained donors to respond in this country. So donors have a basic need to understand that's human nature and it isn't wrong. And I think that, you know, that comes in an inherent tension of we should not put on affected communities the education responsibility. So that's sort of part of what we as fundraisers and communicators have to take on, that education responsibility with the affected communities we work with. And we'll get into that in a minute. But your donors need to understand you can't get away from that education piece. And one of the reasons why the easy button way is the easy button way is because it leans into the most basic human tendencies of I want to help and I get a gold star, right? The taking the time to actually get somebody to understand an affected population ethically takes longer. It's harder work, but it will get you stickier, longer LTV donors because they really get you. And that is what we're talking about, true co-conspirator, true ally donors versus the kind of one and done, guilt-driven, savior-driven, emergency-driven kind of donors. We see this, you know, really through a lot of the 2020 giving data when people gave because of the pandemic and the uprising for racial justice during summer 2020. Most of the grantees that we have who got lots of donors during that period, fewer than 2% have retained because they leaned into that easy button of give because of this crisis, given the now, versus that may be why they gave, but then that, you know, really getting them along that storytelling route so that they get it and they become an ally donor and a co-conspirator. So again, you have to actually financially plan for the longer burn to get donors the ethical way. Questions, comments? Am I scaring the heck out of anybody? Okay. Dana, Marisa, Yasmin, you guys are good?
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I agree. 'Cause I feel like 2020 people, yeah, we're like, oh, we care about BIPOC folks. And then now they're just like,
Bye. Mm-hmm. Yep. There are a few things that make you really get human nature, like being a fundraiser. So for better or worse. And you guys are welcome to stay off video, but would ask like, give me thumbs up or in the chat just so that like you know, since I can't see head nods, I want to make sure that you're not sitting there going, what the heck is she saying?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Well, so first, I assume you're going to get into it further, so I won't ask like what is authentic storytelling.
We are indeed going to get into that.
just make sure we're not. But then the links that you're providing, how can we actually access those?
So we always put the PDF on the Resilience Initiative portal.
Okay.
And if you can't find it there, just email one of us and we can send it to you.
Okay.
So through that, you'll see PDFs and then a link to the YouTube channel that has all the recordings of the webinars.
Thank you.
Sure. And some more links for you. So in a perfect world, when you tell your story, everyone would be moved to act and support, but we all know that's not true. So we have to make the commitment to not use stories as bait. So in terms of the how do you do it right, Sherry, this is the deck that I have here from the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council. This is the deck from a 4-hour training that they did on how do you tell stories about and with homeless people. And how do you do it right in terms of actually interacting with this affected population? How do you gather stories ethically? Like, I can't cover that in an hour. I can give the headlines and point you to the right resources, but we could do days on how do you do this right. And there's some really great trainers out there, especially in the BIPOC space. We work with Mia Weeks on some of our other projects who do trauma-informed storytelling. So if that's something that your organizations are interested in and looking for more deep training, definitely let me know. Happy to point you her way. So the big thing about trauma-informed storytelling is to always include the solution or path forward, not just the emotional hook or the trauma. So as any fundraiser who has tested imagery before, like a picture of a child looking sad, destitute, etc., versus a smiling child, the child looking in hardship is going to win 9 times out of 10 on any appeal. What we're trying to do is make sure we don't lean into that easy button and say, here is the actual position that this child is in. Here is where they are. Here is the path forward. We are not looking for the easy emotional hook. And again, it is harder money to raise, but it is the right money to raise, because otherwise we are perpetuating the othering and marginalization of affected communities. The other thing, Sherry, to your question, that is sort of the headline of trauma-informed storytelling is full agency for the storyteller. So whoever story you're telling, in what and how they share and how it's used, and making sure that they're fully capable of giving that consent. So if you are collecting stories among a community, that it is whoever story you are using has signed off, gets what signing off on their story means, and that you actually use their voice, their imagery. Like, we should never see like a stock photo in somebody else's story, you know, because we use the stock photo of what we think the donor is going to react to. We should never clean up language to make it more proper to the donor's ear. If somebody is speaking in a lexicon that, you know, it doesn't line up with the profile of your donor. So those are the kinds of things that we are talking about when we talk about authentic storytelling. World Food Program, one of their marketing folks is actually a former client of mine when she was at Nature Conservancy, wrote a fantastic article, and I've linked to it here, about how to write with dignity, agency, and respect for people that they serve. And so what I've got on these next few slides, and when we say like, how do we do it? That is going to be a little bit different for every organization, because each of you work with different populations, an Indigenous population, an immigrant population. There are different nuances to each of those. So this is through the lens of World Food Programs. And they actually went through a significant exercise to say, here's our style guide, both in our written content, our graphic content, or what we'll talk about later as all of the elements of storytelling strategy. Here's how we look at them for the people who we work with as working with the most extreme food insecure population in the world. So they went through and looked at what were those words that felt like they were questionable in terms of, are they othering? Are they marginalizing? Are they not giving agency to the population we exist to serve? So they landed on that for them, including as many details and as much specificity to contextualize the terms was really important. And that the content creators really have taken a people-first approach to avoid labeling the beneficiaries with any descriptors that sort of take away their agency and their respect. So I I put this all in here. I don't expect everybody to read it word for word on screen, but I just wanted to use this as an excellent example of an organization that works with a population that would be incredibly easy to say, these are the poorest, most vulnerable people in the world. And it's not something that we should necessarily say. People aren't vulnerable. They are put in situations that causes a vulnerability because of a systemic problem. So to really think about that and using the language of the people we're supporting with direct quotes and communities leading the conversations. So if you were talking, we just got off a great call with another organization that works at the intersection of civic health and democracy. And they were talking about, we don't work in reproductive justice, so we are staying in our lane and we are reaching out to partners in the reproductive justice space to make a comment about this week within our context, but we aren't leading that conversation. So people first phrases, so communities facing hunger, people experiencing vulnerability, families who have been displaced. Because that it's one of those things that, and I think we have somebody join. Nazreen, hello.
Hello.
So this, and Marisa, I'm glad that this is helpful because definitely link to the article and Polly, if you want to, if you can throw that in the chat, or Violetta, because I know you downloaded the deck. Those kind of word choices, it seems so small, but it's really, really critical. Same with when we're talking about like equity versus equality or something as simple as help. We struggle with that a lot in our own language of like, do we help our grantees? Do we empower our grantees? So we don't actually talk about we help people. It's, we work with them. We bring our skill set to the table, they bring theirs, and we try to get the job done, but we aren't helping. So this is, instead of saying, we helped these 400 farmers, we trained these 400 farmers on hydroponics for this reason. So really getting into that contextualization and the specificity as opposed to using the easy button languages that fundraisers so often have done. Beneficiary is another one. I grew up in the healthcare space, most of you know, and so beneficiary was just like, it was a normal word, right? People we serve, much better than beneficiary, because beneficiary has a negative context to it. A local partner, a participant in this pilot, what specificity and context can you give that takes away that sort of broad language of we have a savior relationship, we are helping them, we are fixing it, we are providing equality.
I have a question, if I could interrupt for just a
Yeah,
second.
absolutely, Sharon.
So under the help heading, it talks about, it references empower, but I've always understood that empower is not a good term to use because it's gifting the power to, the other person. And I'm just curious to know what you think or others think about that.
Yeah, I think that we're very careful not to use empower in our language because we can't give power. Our job is to break down the blocks to their own power.
Okay.
And that's why there isn't a universal guide and every organization has to navigate this themselves.
Okay.
Because in World Food Programs, a full belly can be an empowering thing. And when you look at their storytelling, that's often when they use the word empower, you'll see that nuance that it is, when we deal with the food insecurity, there is a feeling of empowerment by the individual. So it really is all contextual. Would love to hear if anybody else has thoughts on that. Quiet crew this afternoon. Thank you, Polly, for throwing that in there. Other things that they dealt with, words that describe a person's emotions or state of being. So nothing about poor, helpless, powerless, victim language. That I think applies to all of us, unless, some cases we work with some domestic violence nonprofits as part of our strategic assistance partnerships. And they do use the word victim in certain contexts, but not all contexts. So again, this is something you have to work through with your own content, but really keeping those, like the headlines in mind of personal agency, and not hitting the emotional, easy button of fundraising. Also really specific to World Food Programs, they work in third world developing countries. So, they are trying to get rid of all language around low income, middle income there, and saying like countries that live on X dollars a day. So thinking through language that's specific to where you do your work and with whom you do your work. All right, so hopefully that is a helpful guide. Definitely, if you want to, that is something that we could certainly get into in our deep dive session, is that if you have certain terms that you're questioning, or you have certain ways that you approach your story from a language perspective, that would be helpful just to riff through with thought partners on the call, definitely bring those to our next session. Nazreen, before we go into this next section, since we have a small crew, I had asked everybody up front to say, like, what about storytelling is of interest to them? What made you want to join this call? Just so I make sure that I hit what you need to know.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize for being late. Definitely interested in just some basic frameworks for, how to approach how we tell our story and how we talk about our work. So yeah, just kind of looking for, some basic guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got it. Cool. All right. So we talked about, like, upfront why this is a different thing for everywhere on this change spectrum you fall as an organization. We talked about trauma-informed storytelling. Please look up the resources that we've shared. They are, this is something that, as I say, I can introduce in an hour. It is not, something we can go deep dive. And if a deep dive would be of interest, I would definitely pull in, as a privileged white person, there's like not a place I don't have privilege. I would want to pull in the right trainers based on who would be interested. So as I say, we typically, Nia has been somebody we've worked with, and some others, so that just do a fantastic job and they work in frontline groups where they're doing that kind of story collecting and telling. So let me know if there is any interest in that. We can see what we can do. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of how do you build a story framework? So outside of collecting the stories, then how do you use them to actually put context and help that donor and prospective donor understand what you do and why they need to be involved? And because we aren't going to lean into the easy button of sort of emotional trigger storytelling, building the storytelling framework is really important, because you're rarely telling a story one and done, because you're not, flashing up the picture of a kid with a child and with the fly in their eye kind of fundraising. You're telling a more robust, longer lead story that takes, a lot of different lenses to it. So this framework is intended to support ethical storytelling in that manner. So when we talk about a storytelling strategy, the word strategy gets thrown around a lot in a lot of different ways. So here's what I mean when I say storytelling strategy. Is really that systemic way to tell your story. So this is a system of rigor to put to how you collect and tell your stories. So it is serialized writing that is the perfect medium for ensuring that a strategy in motion is articulated, circulated, and understood by the greatest number of people. I love that quote, because all of our work is always in motion. Our missions are never complete. The need is never completely fulfilled. It's why we are here. And this storytelling framework, I think, is great for telling a story in motion. And it fits that donor need of they got to understand, and you got to keep inviting them in. Make sense? All right. So before we get to the stories, we have to talk about the house that the stories live in. And Violetta knows this very, very well, having built our brand structure. So when we talk about the brand structure, we're talking about the stuff that probably existed before you got to your organization, that lives on a dusty page of your website that nobody's touched in a while. That's typically where we see things like this. Some of you may have, throughout the last few years with all of the upheaval in our space, have revisited and rewritten these. So, but somewhere in your world, there is at least a like vision, mission, purpose kind of language. So I highly recommend, before you figure out your storytelling strategy, to start with your brand structure, because every story that you write, tell, etc., has to live in this house. So think about this as the literal frame of the house. And we'll go into what each of these things are: truth, vision, purpose, mission, values, impact paths, and audience. Thank you, Marisa. I appreciate the heads up on that, because I do take it personally when we lose students and I'm like, wait, did my talk suck? So all right, so here's what this looks like for progressive multiplier. And I know that this is like a total wall of words and hard to get through, so I'm going to walk you through it. And Violetta, if you would jump in here as when we get to sort of the content buckets that you've created that match up to our structure. So your brand truth is the thing that somebody who is talking with you has to believe. It isn't about your organization. It is about like the truth that you have been organized around as an organization. So for us, as a funding intermediary who funds fundraising experiments, our truth is that organized people and organized money create power in a democracy, and diversifying the people and the sources of money creates more and more durable power. So for anybody who we're going to tell a story to, they have to be bought into that. But in some cases, we actually have to explain what that truth is to talk about what we do. Like even with institutional funders, like sometimes our storytelling starts with our brand truth. So make sure you know what your brand truth is. The next piece is the vision. So if we did our work and ultimately achieved the goal, so again, this is not about our work. This is if our work is done right, what's the ultimate outcome? So for us, that's a progressive movement big enough with the power enough to achieve justice, realize democracy, and restore the environment. So those first two things have nothing to do with the organization, but the truth and the ultimate goal. Your story is the one in the middle, but you often have to tell the covers of the book too. So that's why it's important to have them as part of this structure and why they're the first and second thing on the list. Your brand purpose is why your organization exists. That is different from your mission. And a lot of times we see groups, they will have a vision and a mission and they miss their purpose. And the purpose is a lot of the storytelling backbone. So even if your brand folks or your marketing folks or your ED didn't come up with all of these layers, you actually need them to support storytelling. So fill them in. You have to be able to tell the story, even if it's not a codified part of your vision mission statement. It's an important thing to have as part of your storytelling arsenal. So the purpose is why you exist. For us, we exist to radically shift the progressive movement towards scale, self-determination, and sustainability by creating a high leverage investment opportunity for donors who want to strengthen the independent financial position of movement groups. That is something I rarely talk about in our storytelling, or that Violetta lifts up in our storytelling, but it's inherent in a lot of the underpinnings of how we tell our stories, that we are here because we want to radically shift the size, scale, and durability of the movement. And the only way we think we can do that is putting more money and more of the right kind of independent money into it. Then the mission. All of you have mission statements because you are a 501c3, and you have to have a mission statement in order to get a 501c3. So somewhere there is a mission statement. So notice the difference between purpose and mission statement. When you read our purpose, it's about we exist as an investment opportunity for philanthropy. But what we actually do is help groups. We help organizations build a movement of, by, and for everyday people by subgranting strategic assistance training. Do all of those building blocks make sense to everybody from the frame of the house? I'm seeing thumbs up and head nods. Sherry, you contemplated. Does that feel right? Okay. The other part I'm going to call this the foundation of the house. So if you think of the truth, vision, mission, purpose as the sort of four sides of a house, the values are the foundation. So we rarely publish what our values are. Like that's not part of what our values are, kind of storytelling or social post. Certainly could be. But for us, the values need to be inherent in every story we tell, in the voice, in the vibe, in the tone, in the photography selection. This is the who we are, like down to a cellular soul level as an organization. So these are our 8 values: center the communities we exist to serve, build beloved community with hope and joy, fail forward, be anti-racist, change minds, change systems. That's why I love what I think, Yasmin, it was you when you were talking about, changing hearts. We literally have that as a value, is change minds, change systems. Respect personal agency, learn from everyone, and demonstrate low hierarchy and extreme accountability. So if you look at our social media feeds, like if you pull up our Instagram account, you get that vibe, you get the hope, you get the joy, you get the experimentation, you get a centering of system affecting communities. It's there. We don't say it, but it's there. So that's why this is the foundation of storytelling. And again, values are something that sometimes organizations will spell them out and sometimes they won't. If they aren't part of your organization's spelled out stuff, write them down. Gut check them with your executive director, your marketing director, whoever is right in your culture and organization to check that with. But you can't tell the story if you don't know the value lens through which you're telling it. Does that make sense? All right. So that's all the stuff that doesn't change. That's like the literally why we exist, who we are as, a corporate person, etc. Everything in blue and orange on this slide can change as part of your storytelling architecture. Your impact paths, you'll see them labeled as products, are what you do to serve your mission. This is probably something that you've got. So for us, we give grants, we provide strategic assistance, we do training and facilitate learning. Like those are the 3 buckets of things we do to achieve our mission. I think Marisa was talking, like they do litigation, they do direct policy advocacy, that kind of thing. All of you should know this list. So these are the things you talk about. For us, that's here are the grants we've given and what they're doing, or let's talk about Fundraising Friday as part of our training program. So these are a lot of the sort of more the facts of the story that we tell come from our impact paths and our audience. Our audiences, and I say that this can change as your impact paths can, as your programs evolve. So for us right now, we talk to funders, we talk to groups, and we have B2B partners. At some point, we may launch a small dollar donor program, and so we'd have individual donors we talk to, so we'd add that bucket in. So this can change. It doesn't change greatly and frequently, but you can definitely have some change in there. So your audiences, these buckets should line up to whatever in your tech. So we've talked about MarTech before, marketing technology. In a perfect world, whatever these buckets are reflected in any of the systems through which you're talking to people. So these are the segments in the email system. These are the segments or the pages on the website. So that people can always see themselves and you give yourself an easy way to tell the story specifically to who you need to speak to. Make sense? Good? Okay. So V, I'm going to ask you, so we built this house before you got here. And then you have been decorating it with all of the orange content buckets. So the content is really what brings the house to life. It is the paint on the walls. It is the pictures on the walls. It's the comfy couch and throw pillows. It's all the things. It's what gives it life and texture and color. So how did you come up with these content buckets, and explain to folks what always on franchise and moment in time are?
So our always on content is the steady beat. It explains what we're doing and what it matters. It should be of interest for all of our audiences. And it's pretty much like what we keep working towards on a regular basis. Being a funding intermediary and having our program areas, I really wanted to reflect each program area individually and the grantees that live with those program areas. So I did revenue generation and realizing democracy. So how they intersect, how our grantees do rev gen in the democracy space. Same with achieving justice and restoring the environment. So these are my buckets where I talk about their experiments, their projects, what they're doing, what they're winning, their failing forwards, and who they are and why they're awesome, and how we've been able to help them figure out their rev gen strategies and work with us. Then a bucket for our team, because who would Progressive Multiplier be without Bethany, Drea, our operations person, Lisa, our fundraising person, now Polly, our movement superhero, and myself, our storyteller. So it's very critical for me to highlight who we are and how we're doing the work that we're doing. And that's why we have our team bucket. And then we have our philanthropy and our off the movement buckets, where we try to stay on top of both of those industries. So being a funding intermediary, I really want to be able to speak up to our philanthropy partners, our funders, and that institutional philanthropy that we're trying to also radically change, as well as lifting up the grantee wins that aren't necessarily part of our projects, because we're partners with our movement groups. So we just don't want to tell the story of what they're doing with us. We want to also lift up the wins that they're having on their own, with their own revenue generation, and how they're keeping up and doing their awesome work executing their mission. Any questions before I move on to our franchise content? Okay. Our franchise content is mostly specific to a season or a team or a specific audience that we're trying to target. And it echoes the compliments of our always on. So our franchise, for example, in the news, responding to the leak draft for the Supreme Court, Pride Month coming up in June, stuff like that just comes up out of nowhere that we can expect and we couldn't have planned for it otherwise. That's our moment in time. Sorry, I confused them. But yeah, so our in the news is keeping relevant, staying abreast with what's going on. Then we have our events, so our funder briefings and things that we're working on, or partnerships that we're having, like a webinar with Nonprofit Quarterly that we had a couple months ago. And our initiatives, that's like our Vote Your Voice grantees, our Resilience Initiative educational partnership, and what we're doing out of our general grants and our programs. And then our thought leadership. We're trying to establish ourselves as a leader in the movement for revenue generation. And we're doing that through thought leadership, blog posts, and just really creating the resources that could be relevant for our partners moving forward. And then we have our moment in time, which I actually explained a little earlier. And it's the kind of things that we can't plan for, that we don't know that they're coming, but that are still relevant to our audience, to our mission, to the work that we do, and that we have to jump in and respond to that. And that's pretty much our content buckets. And what I do each month is that I select the state that we're going to be on, which I think
We're going to get into that in
Yeah.
one second.
Okay, no worries, not skipping anything,
But
but
I will toss it back to you.
thank you.
So outside of the fact that this is a crazy wordy slide, does this structure make sense? And do you think it would be something that would be helpful to build out to help you guys with your storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. It would. I'm struggling in my head as you're going through it for some of them, trying to figure out what I, because it's a little bit different. You serve nonprofits.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels very complicated because we're serving different audiences, but
Yeah, and this should make the complication easier. It's one of those things that's hard to get it all succinct, but if you can get it this succinct, the storytelling gets far easier. So it's worth putting in the time up front on this sort of brand structure before you get into like, let's calendar content and assign out who's going to write what blog and all that happy stuff. So if you are interested in the one-on-one sessions, this is something we can do. We've actually done this with a couple groups. That's exactly the kind of thing that we can do, is like build this out for you in over 5 hours. So, okay. Rest of the crew on the phone, any questions before we go on? Okay. So there are 5 elements to the storytelling strategy. So we've got our house, our brand structure is our house, values are our foundation. All of the storytelling is what brings it to life and gives it color. So the first element of that color and bringing it to life are the content categories, which V just went through in terms of the always on, the franchise, and the moment in time. So we can go on to element 2. So the second thing are the assets, and these are probably the thing we're all most familiar with, right? So these are all the words, all the pictures, all the videos, all the things. So just a few words to the wise about once you have your content buckets of what are the always on stories you want to tell, what are the franchise stories you want to sell. Think of franchises kind of like campaigns. What are the moment in time things you expect? We know, since we work with movement groups in these different spaces, our moment in times are often like legislation coming down, or, there is an instance of police brutality. There's something that we're jumping on that is kind of movement driven. So we plan our assets to be able to respond that way. So when you're thinking about your assets, create them with your publishing channels in mind, and assets that can be used for the greatest purpose. So if you're going to take the time to shoot a video, even if it's just an iPhone man on the street kind of video, make sure you shoot it at a length and in a way that you can cut it into segments for use in social media, for posting on your website, for using on a donation form, all of those things. So make sure that like you are never looking at a one and done asset. None of us have the budgets for that. So really be thoughtful about the content you're creating and how much you can spread it around. The other thing we highly recommend is for that always on content. So for us, that's, we've got a bucket for each of our program areas, a bucket of philanthropy, of the movement, a bucket for our team. A baseline library to support that always on content is important. So that can be as simple of like, for our team bucket, we have pictures of, you guessed it, our team. We have quotes from our former executive director on different program areas. Violetta collects quotes from our grantees as they finish their projects so that we can talk about the projects. So that baseline library of stuff that you can pull from, just working that into your systems like reporting, like onboarding. We have a weekly team meeting where we start with a question that has nothing to do with our business and is like things like, what's your favorite way to eat potatoes? Like we record all of that stuff so that we can use it for, fun posts. And there are a ton of free creative assets. So yes, we are a funder, but we are not an endowed funder. We are a cash-strapped nonprofit, just like everybody on this phone. So Violetta has to get super crazy creative with what apps can help her create really cool word art and things like that. We put a few $100s into creating Canva editable templates with a graphic designer. So again, when you're thinking about creating assets, make templates multi-use and super editable, things like that. Any questions?
I have a question that is related that I've struggled with a lot, is a photo database. We have so many photos, and we had them at one point on iPhoto, and then it got everything got duplicated. We put them on our server, and we have a neat. I don't know if you guys have any recommendations for that.
So there are formal softwares you can buy that actually create photo libraries. We are a little old school and low budget in what we do. So we came up with a formal naming structure for the photos based on racial makeup of the people we photographed, what type of program area they'd align to, and the primary activity that is happening in the photo. And then we have them filed by those things. So sometimes they're filed in multiple places, but if I'm like, hey, we're doing a post on democracy stuff, I want to see any photo we have that would fit with realizing democracy stuff, we've got all of those. Or, we're talking about women because of the SCOTUS leak. Here are all of our photos that have women of different races in them. So we built it from the lens of here's how we're going to look for them based on our instances versus just I think where a lot of groups get into trouble is that they don't what we call run the use cases of like, how am I actually going to look for this? And they build a photo library that like isn't actually searchable or usable for how they're going to do it. So that's where I'd start. If you've got the budget, formal photo library software is great, but if you can put together a rigorous naming convention and a Google Drive, that works. You doing things like a Google Drive or I used to have a client that kept all of their photos in Basecamp, something that allows you to tag or file in different areas. So like the same photo I have of women of different races is also sitting in democracy or environment or justice for us as well. So that's kind of the key. Does that help, Sherry?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on assets before we get to elements 3, 4, and 5? Okay. So the content mode is the third element. So the categories are why are we communicating? The assets are what's the actual format? Is it a written word? Is it a photography piece? Then there's the content mode is what answers what intensity are we communicating about this thing about? So there are 3 content modes: steady state, promotion, and takeover. And really what these 3 modes are the recipe for which you mix up your always on franchise and moment in time content. So if you're in a steady state mode, it's a regular old month, there are no big campaigns happening, it's sort of business as usual, about 70% of your content should be that evergreen, always on stuff that you can talk about. 20% should be franchise, and 10% should be left for unplanned. There is nothing sacrosanct about these percentages. It's just a good starting spot to say, like, if you're in a steady state and nothing big is happening, you're going to weight the majority of the content towards your always on type of content that you can talk about every day of the year. Because if you've got nothing going on, you need to feed that majority of the content, right? You don't have a big thing happening that can feed your content strategy. The second mode is a promotional mode. So this is when you've got a campaign happening. So, and it's a few weeks that you've got something happening that's a few weeks long, like think Pride Month. That's on top of mind just because June is next month and we've been thinking about it. So this is where like 50% of the content is going to be your primary franchise. So like 50% of our content in Pride Month will be Pride related. 20% will be our other franchises, 20% will be our always on stuff, and then we still leave that 10% for unplanned. You'll always see we leave about 10% of our stuff unplanned for a moment in time. And that gives Violetta the flexibility to lift stuff up as it happens. Then the last mode is a takeover mode. And this is sort of like the world is ending. We are stopping for something. It is a big giant day. And it's usually like a day, maybe 2 days. But this is like literally a takeover. This is the thing we're talking about. So 90% of our content during that like short period is going to be about this thing. Think like election day, December 31st, for those of us who have big C3 files and make a lot of money on that day. Or it can be the end of a campaign drive. So like we have lots of folks that do get out the vote campaigns and they end on sort of a big day, big rally day, something like that. So these are just, think about modes as recipes. It's how you take these 3 types of content buckets that you have and put them together in a ratio. And again, ratio is not sacrosanct. It's just think about what, steady state, you don't have a campaign or something cool, new and sexy feeding your content. So it's got to be your always on content. It's making up the most of it. Promotion, you're going to have content you want to get out the door about this thing. And then you have sort of your all hands on deck moments. Does this make sense? And is this helpful? Okay. So the 4th element here then are messaging frames. So this is the other sort of slice to give, especially that always on story or a story that you're telling for a long period of time, different ways to talk about it. Like, so we are always talking about our Realizing Democracy grantees and that program. It is not a giant story. So Violetta has to get really creative in terms of the frames and the lenses through which she tells the story so that we can essentially make the story stretch and appeal to different audiences. So when we talk about messaging frames, it's really what are we saying about the topic? So is it an information frame? Are we giving information about the issue? Like, our democracy is at risk because. Or is it an impact frame? So our work does this, like every dollar we grant, our grantee partners are turning that into almost $4 in independent revenue. That's the impact of our grant making program. Is it a risk frame? This is, you will often see risk incorporated, especially into our appeals of, if you don't do this, this will happen. Or if we don't raise this, this is the program that is at risk. And then we see the action frame. So that's the inviting in. Can you come do this? Can you give this? Can you post this? Can you share this? So these are sort of the 4 different frames through which we then tell those stories that live in those 3 buckets. So this is an example of how you put frames, modes, and content categories together. So if you're in a steady state mode, again, about 70% of that content is going to be that always on content categories. So we want to break down our impact and risk and action frames then to that 70%. So if we're planning 10 total posts, 7 of them are going to be always on. So of that 7, 2 issues we're facing today, 2 how we're solving, 2 that make the audience care, and 1 call to action. So think about that arc. Because for this, we want to land on that, call to action. Please come to, this thing, or please give to this campaign. So think about breaking it down that way, because it makes telling the same evergreen story easier and it gives it more punch. That make sense? It's all mine.
So
yeah, go ahead, Terry.
So for example, we're always trying to figure out our social media strategy, or what's coming up for. We had a meeting the other day. What's coming up in the next month? And so you would actually, and we had broken it out by categories that were more content specific. Something about our organization, something about XYZ. So you would do it more like this.
Yes.
Okay.
So
those would be
where we start. V, do you have easy access to our May calendar? Or something that
I do.
So, well, V is pulling that up. What we do, Sherry, is so based on our staff bandwidth, we say we're going to post this many times a month, we're going to email this many times a month, etc. So we start with what will not bury Violetta from a needing to get it out the door. She creates a calendar that represents those number of touches. And she comes to the content meeting with, here is the content mode that we're in. So this month we are in a steady state mode. That means 70% of this content is going to be our always on bucket. So we have our 6 always on buckets. Let's start matching those buckets up to the slots of here are always on slots. Here are franchise slots. So we literally put that architecture to a calendar, and then we talk about the topics, the specific topics. So, so there's that planning. And Violetta asks Polly, asks Lisa, our development director, myself, like, what funder meetings do we have? What grantee projects are finishing? You know, is there anything happening in our grantees world, like big legislation? You know, is there anything happening in the world of philanthropy we need to be aware of? And then she actually picks with our collaboration the topics within that framework. Because if you start too far down the path of like, let's post something about our organization, you kind of lose the why of what are we talking about. Like you start buying throw pillows that don't match the room is essentially what happens. V, do you want to share what you got?
B, it won't let me share. It says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Well, that's lame. Do you
But,
want to, can you put the link to the doc in the chat and I will pull it up?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think it's important to see this in action. We practice what we preach here.
Yes.
All right. Reshare. It's loading.
Yeah, I don't know if I thought it was my computer, but it may be the drive that's a little slow today.
The drive is definitely being pokey. Okay. We shall screen share. Here we go. Okay. So let's see if I can pump that up since it's actually getting smaller. That's weird. Okay. So this is what this looks like in our world. So there is, you can see there is a slide for every month, and our content buckets are over here. So our evergreen ones and our franchise ones. And based on the fact that in June, we're going to be in a promotion state because we have a really exciting webinar coming up July 12th. So this will be our lead up promotion. Violetta has actually said, okay, here's how I'm going to map these buckets based on when I'm posting, when we're emailing, when we are putting up a blog, things like that. So before we ever get to what is the story we're telling about our team, we make the commitment to the framework first. The other key piece to this, and this is often where content programs fall apart, these sort of salmon colored blocks are basically Violetta's to-dos every day to get the content produced and published in whatever channel. We often don't give enough space to do that. Because it's like, oh, it's an Instagram post. It's super easy and quick to do. To do it right takes some discipline and thought. So I would rather us post less and get it right than bury Violetta with posting every day. And to be more thoughtful in it. So make sure that that's why we like to plan the production and the publishing together, if that makes sense. Is that helpful seeing that in action, Sherry?
Yeah, and it's really small, so I did a screenshot.
Yeah.
I can see it bigger here, but what is the program that you're using, Violetta?
For that planning, we're using PowerPoint or Google Slides.
Just
So,
the PowerPoint. So you're just creating that map
Yes.
yourself with, okay. Or
Yeah.
something like that.
And
Okay.
I'm happy to send both the slide deck that has the empty months in it, as well as what we do, if that makes anybody's life easier. If that would be helpful to share.
I'm also happy to meet with whoever wants a more in-depth walkthrough of how I put the calendar together and do that planning.
Thank you.
Yes, that's another one-on-one thing. Violetta's way more fun to work with than I am. All right. Let us get back to our last piece here of our lenses, and then we will have gone through it all. Okay. So the last element of a storytelling strategy are the lenses. So this is the how are we saying it? So this is one versus many. So a one lens is a personal story, an individual story, versus a many lens is the systemic story, the impact number story, the full picture story. Because we tell the same stories over and over again, like we're talking about the impact of our grant making, I can tell that story and Violetta can tell that story as like we worked with Voice in Northern Virginia, and we gave them a $13,000 grant and they raised $108,000. And with that money, they hired an organizer to work with one of the most systemically affected BIPOC communities in Alexandria, in Northern Virginia. So that's how we tell it with like one grantee, one hire from a revenue generation project. We can also say all of our progressive stimulus project grantees had this effect on democracy or on organizing around the country. The Voice story is sort of part of that, but we can tell the next. So we'll tell like the cohort story, or we'll tell the entire program story, or we'll tell our progressive multiplier story to say we've granted out this many million and this much has moved into the movement, and that's what this means for power building. So when you think about stacking those stories throughout the month, throughout the year, think about switching those lenses back and forth because it really makes your content last longer. And that is it for slides. So with 3 minutes left. Our next class will be our deep dive storytelling discussion. So would love if you guys want to, we could work on storytelling frameworks. As people sign up, we can, look at specific examples. You guys can, if you have language you want to look at from a style guide perspective, lots of options for what we want to do. It would be helpful if you guys, based on what you've heard today, what would you like more of, and where do you want to dive in?
I feel like where my mind is going is that we might benefit more from the one-on-one at this point, because we need to look at our story, how we've been doing it. But I've got, you've so many things I've so many things I've learned from this already that I'm looking forward to applying.
It's a nod.
Yeah, but do need to dive into our own strategies. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like the content calendar because it's all organized and pretty easy to understand even from an outside kind of view. So yeah, no, it'd be great if we could even think logistically on like how planning works and what would be an appropriate amount of time to plan for certain events coming up.
Yeah, like we could do a real live, build out. What does building out a month for us look like and where we start, and show you sort of that process and timelines along the way. And we could have discussion along the way of like, okay, how does this translate to your business? If you've got an event like we do on July 12th, when do we start promoting and how do we promote and things like that? Is that would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be awesome. I don't even know.
I agree. That would be really good because we've used different approaches and different spreadsheets, and we haven't quite figured out one that works great. And so it'd be interesting to follow.
It's a challenge to find the one that works right. Yeah, I can. Yeah, spreadsheets, no bueno.
And then we've done Word docs and we've all sorts of things, and it's a big old mess. So
yeah, we have retired many a spreadsheet. I think the PowerPoint, because we can like drag and drop, and because it's a creative iterative process. And if you lock yourself into thinking you're producing a deliverable versus like essentially you need a whiteboard you're always going to be banging on, that's why this format has worked for us. But so V, are you up for that in our deep dive session?
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
We will build real time and have a good discussion. So I'm excited for that in 2 weeks.
Awesome.
In the meantime, sign up for one-on-ones, holler if you need us, and have fabulous weekends.
Thank you.
Take care all. Bye.